Remember one of the promises of the US Biden election campaign to hold Saudi Arabia accountable specifically for the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi?
Khashoggi was in fact murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince.
Well, Joe Biden can't remember that either, and technically if you can't remember what you said, then you're not really lying in the same way as if you did remember it. That's right, the US Biden administration is going to give immunity to Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
Now, the Biden administration has given Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman immunity from a lawsuit over the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
The relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia has not been the greatest in past years. In fact, it is clear that Saudi Arabia is somewhat moving away from the United States to a certain degree, and specifically that Mohammed bin Salman is not really in the good books of Joe Biden, or perhaps that Joe Biden is not in Mohammed bin Salman's good books. And we saw this earlier this year when Biden visited Riyadh and didn't have a lot to show for his attempts to get Saudi Arabia to up oil production.
The Saudi announcement a blow to American consumers and a gut punch to President Biden, despite his fist bump summit with the Saudi Crown Prince, when the administration thought they could get a deal to keep production up and prices low before the midterms.
Despite all of this, the fact that Joe Biden is now coming around, changing his stances, and attempting to shore up relations with Saudi Arabia really does put a stain on Biden's legacy when it comes to him discussing issues of human rights, let's say, or criticizing specifically Iran. And many people would say, what in the oil is going on? But this is really easy to track. And if we look at Joe Biden's first ever speech on foreign policy, he prioritizes ending the war in Yemen, which would include and did include in his speech, which later the US Biden administration discussed going back on, canceling relevant arms sales to Saudi offensive action in Yemen. The Biden administration wanted to treat the Saudis like a pariah state, but of course, as the war rages on in Ukraine and Western sanctions backfire and hurt the West more than they do Russia, the US Biden administration has been put in a position where flatly it needs Saudi Arabia's oil.
The White House is weighing lifting a ban on U.S. sales of offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia ahead of a visit to the region by President Joe Biden.
But most crucially, what the decision of the Biden administration does in giving immunity to Mohammed bin Salman after U.S. intelligence reports indicated that he was involved in the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, is that it serves as yet another example of how the U.S. government operates on double standards. Even worse, you're trying to get closer to Saudi Arabia at the same time as you are virtue signaling about women's rights in Iran. And there is no question that Saudi Arabia has a much worse track record on this issue.
What matters most about governments around the world is less whether they're democratic or non-democratic and more whether they're pro-American or anti-American. And the simple fact is Saudi Arabia has been an American partner going back 80 years.
Furthermore, what this does is show that the US itself does not have principles. That the words they say like democracy, freedom, liberation, human rights are just that, words.